Once we discover we're both autistic and ADHD, it feels like we've unlocked the key to everything. But then comes the real question. How do we actually use this key? I'm Adria Sophia Melikar, an AuDHD coach who's walked this path myself. I've spent over a decade helping hundreds who don't fit the mold to find their own way forward. On AuDHD Sparks, we're reimagining what's possible when we stop forcing ourselves to be who we're not and start doing life differently in ways that leave us feeling resourced and alive. Okay, so we were parked on this remote dirt road in our camper van, middle of nowhere. It was getting dark out. No one was coming down that road until morning, like if even then. Like this was not like a normal used road. This was like a little side road in the middle of, nature. And we weren't blocking anyone's path. We had water, we had warmth and a heater in the van. We had everything we needed. And yet still something felt off. Not unsafe, we weren't in danger, just unsettled. Like the space itself had this restless quality that we couldn't quite name. My partner felt it too. Even though we did our usual winding down rituals, we both just couldn't settle that night. And to this day, whenever we stop at a spot and we kind of feel this unsettledness, we say that the place has kinetic energy. Like that's kind of the phrase that we just naturally started to use so that we could put a name to the thing. And so when we're traveling in the van and we find that back road out in nature, we choose the spot to sleep for the night. And then we pull into it, immediately we will know. We'll know, some spots feel cozy, contained, settled. You pull in, your nervous system just exhales. Others feel kinetic, like there's movement in the air even when everything's still. Like there's this restlessness that you can't quite put your finger on. And so now we use it as a barometer before we settle down for the evening anywhere when we're on the road. Because, in the camper van, we have to find a spot to park for the night if we're kind of traveling across country. And so the spot we find might be out in nature. It might be in the wild on some side of a mountain, like miles and miles from civilization, or it might be a spot in a parking lot at a Walmart or on a side street, in a neighborhood or something, if we're kind of like in a town or city. And regardless, this barometer is something that has continually helped us. We can tell immediately, and then we can course correct based on that. Like, does this spot feel cozy or kinetic? And we both feel it. Our nervous systems read the space before our brains can explain why. And here's what I've come to understand. That ability to read a space, to sense whether it holds you or unsettles you, that is not some quirk. And that is something that we often kind of see just the sensitivity and think of it as a flaw or as an inconvenience or a disability. And also in this context, it's super helpful. And that is ancestral inheritance. That kind of body knowing, that attunement to place, that is what allows us to live across multiple locations with AuDHD brains and nervous systems. So even when we're mobile, living in a van, traveling between locations, we're always seeking ways to settle our nervous systems. And when I used to say that we were nomadic, I think that it conjured up a very different image in other people's minds. like maybe they were envisioning it more like the travel vloggers, Kara and Nate, who we've been following for years. They spent a decade without any home base at all, just traveling between different locations, first on a mission to hit 100 countries visited, and then in a camper van trying to hit as many states as possible, and now back over to international travel. And though they've been trying to settle down, they track how many different beds they sleep in per year. And in 2025, they still averaged only a little over 3 nights per bed for that year. And that's what comes to mind when I used to think of nomadic. And that's not us. Like I'm over here trying to sleep in just a few beds for the whole year, like as few beds as possible. Like let's sleep in my own bed all year if we could, because it's not how my brain works, or my partner's for that matter. Early on in my career as a virtual business owner, I followed Natalie Sisson, the suitcase entrepreneur, and thought it sounded so, aspirational, so cool to be nomadic, not beholden to one place, traveling the world, working from your laptop. At the time that I came into business in the early 2010s, it was the dream that was being sold. I think it probably still is, like the digital nomad, right? Like, oh my gosh, how amazing would that be to be a digital nomad and travel the world? And it did sound really exciting. And I dabbled in it in different ways where I could use, being location independent. But the life that Natalie lived, like fully out of a suitcase, always kind of sounded stressful to me, at least for who I was. It sounded like full of executive function drain and without any nervous system stability. And I imagine she has had her own ways of kind of like navigating this, and it's probably not always like fully out of a suitcase in the same way that I'm thinking of it right now. But still, like that just wasn't like, that wasn't the connect. That wasn't the place my brain wanted to go. Or maybe it was the place my brain wanted to go, but not the place that felt healthy to try to go. Like in 2019, I spent almost a month in Bali. I went to like a retreat for my business and then stayed a few extra weeks and kind of like spent time there. And a lot of things were wonderful about it. Other than the, heat and humidity, which I hadn't quite realized yet, really truly is a thing for me. Like I was still comparing myself to other people at that point, but that's a side note. But it wasn't something that felt like it could be a long-term happy situation for me unless I were to have a very specific home base that I got to know, and I got to know people and community, and like there's like specific criteria, right? Like not just plopped into a place and then moving often. And so in a way, you're creating a home, you're creating a new home base. And so if I thought the only options were to stay in one place all of the time, or to do what Natalie or Kara and Nate do, I would be a pretty unhappy AuDHDer. And that's what this episode is about, finding that balance between our ADHD brain getting, stagnant, living in one place 365 days a year, and our autistic brain feeling like unstable and off kilter and unsettled. And so we're talking about the AuDHD way of living across locations. Like, what could that look like? Because when we expand our definition, it opens up all kinds of opportunities, possibilities for us. And of course, this goes hand in hand with how you structure your work life, because if you work in one place all year round and have like a week or two off, then it makes it a lot harder to physically move yourself to different places. Although maybe you can within your own city, or we can get creative with everything. That's what this is about, right? Lifestyle design. But in terms of work life, I'm going to be talking about more alternative working structures and like digging more into that later in the season. So we won't go into that in this episode. We'll kind of stay in the living side of things. And I actually honestly think a lot of us AuDHDers already might have creative work setups just by necessity. If you've gotten a few decades into life, and are still working, you've probably found some way to survive it. There's a pretty high occurrence of self-employed AuDHDers, and I find it to be a theme with my clients and the listeners who reach out to me as well. So chances are you might have a life that actually can lean in this direction somehow. And there might be some shifts you can do, which we'll talk about later in the season, work-wise. Okay. So, and like I mentioned a moment ago, like even if you have a regular non-remote 9-to-5, there are still ways you can apply this. Use this episode as inspiration and just kind of notice what sparks. Okay. With all of that like opening being said, I'm Adria Sophia Melikar. Hello. This is AuDHD Sparks. Welcome to season 2. This is the 3rd episode in the Paths series this season, where we're looking at unconventional ways AuDHD women are designing our lives. Kind of like the modern versions of what it might mean to live at the village edges like our ancestors did. So in episode 21, we talked about claiming the auntie path instead of motherhood. Episode 22, we talked about living intergenerationally with parents or family and how I bought a house with mine that gave me the breathing room to rebuild post-burnout and restructure long-term to be truly sustainable. And so if either of those interest you and you haven't listened yet, go back and give them a listen. Like this Path series is all about kind of having sparks, hearing how different things are laid out or how other people do things, and then noticing something that sparks for you that you can apply to your own life, or something that like opens your awareness of like, oh, there are other possibilities here. And so today we're talking about something that connects to both of those other episodes. What if your life doesn't have to be rooted in one location, but you can still feel rooted? So what if you lived somewhere part of the year and somewhere else another part of the year? What if you went back to the same vacation spot every summer and got to know it deeply? What if you had multiple home bases you rotated between? What if you had a camper van that lets you pop out when you need to shift the energy? Like this might feel initially unconventional, maybe even a little unstable, but what if it's actually exactly what you need? Okay, so before we jump into the core of this episode, if you're starting to realize that the way you've been trying to live doesn't actually fit your nervous system, I made something for you. It is called the Unmasking Menu, 7 places you might still be trying to change yourself instead of designing your own ecosystem instead. You can grab it over at unmaskingmenu.com if you haven't yet. It's totally free. Links also in the show notes. Okay, so living across locations. So in case it's not already clear from what we've talked about, this is not about selling everything and living out of a backpack. It's not about constant movement or being on the road. It's not about adopting the nomad identity or the van life aesthetic. In fact, it's not about designing your life in any way that you've seen an influencer do it on Instagram or YouTube, or like aspiring to fit any specific identity. It is about structuring your life differently in ways that uniquely fit you, not someone else. Having multiple places that genuinely feel like home, following your nervous system's seasonal needs, building geographic flexibility into your actual life structure. But all of it is driven by tuning into what you actually need, listening, noticing, following sparks, course correcting if you steer in a direction that ends up not feeling so good. And allowing all of that type of pathfinding to chart your course until suddenly you realize you've arrived without even knowing it. So let me walk you through what this has looked like for my partner and me over the past 5 years. Okay, so we'll start with phase 1, which I like to think of as the corner suite plus the Oregon house. We got to give it a title. It's a real sexy title, I know. So when our landlord gave us notice in 2020, we moved into my parents' house temporarily, or so we thought. So our landlord was selling the condo we were in. We needed to do something. It was 2020, which you know what that was. We didn't know what the future was. I know I've talked more about this on other episodes, so I won't dig into it too much. But basically, we had the 2 spare bedrooms upstairs in my parents' house connected by a bathroom, our own little corner suite. And a few months into this arrangement, we also rented a house in Oregon while my partner started building his business there. And we needed a physical location for shipping. Plus, he had all his vendors and manufacturing contacts in that area. And so for a couple of years, from 2021, 2022, we bounced back and forth between Oregon and my parents' house in Las Vegas. A month or 2 here, a month or 2 there, 3-day drives in our camper van each time in between. And I loved that Oregon house. Walking distance to downtown in our favorite town, an hour outside of Portland and wine country, slow pace, real people. We made friends with our neighbors. But winters, the Pacific Northwest gray is not for the faint of heart, and definitely for us coming from sunny winter places, we would end up depressed. Like we would definitely get sad. Seasonal affective disorder, is that what it is? Yeah. If I said that wrong, sorry. But anyway, we would have sad. And so we would kind of start leaning towards spending more time in Vegas in the winter, more in Oregon in the summer, if we could help it. And this is when we, without realizing it, started what I now see as multi-based living. Like we had 2 actual homes, not traveling between places, really living in both. And then you have phase 2, the warehouse apartment. One of those titles again. I got you with my titles today, okay? And then so this was like 2023 and 2024. This is when my partner's business outgrew the basement of that Oregon house. They couldn't ship out of that anymore. They needed a dedicated warehouse. The money that was going towards that house shifted towards a warehouse. And so we had to kind of let go of that house to shift the funds to pay for that warehouse rent. And from that point forward, and really to this day, as I'm recording in early 2026, when we were up in Oregon, we lived in our van, but pull it right into the warehouse. So it's kind of like we have our camper van, but we still have like full running water and flushable toilet and like, yeah, that kind of stuff. And so that means also showers in an open warehouse over the warehouse drain with a shower head that's like suctioned to the side of the van, which feels quite adventurous, I will say, and also a little cold. It also meant living with a CrossFit gym on the other side of our wall with kind of like that on and off background noise of like the bass coming through from their music or the sound of barbells hitting the floor. But we also built a kind of like kitchen and living room area in the warehouse corner. We brought in a fridge, put a dresser that we had in there that had like, the drawers we could use for storing food, dry goods and stuff, and like had a food prep station on top of that with like an espresso machine. We had a couch and a TV so we could kind of like wind down at the end of the night. We washed our dishes in the bathroom sink in the tiny bathroom at the warehouse, which we even found a solution for that. We had like a 3-rack tiered rolling cart that we would put our dishes in, and like we found systems for everything. And it was walking distance to like this beautiful like natural park in the edge of a wooded area where we take our dog for a walk every morning. It was still a 5-minute drive to our cute little small town downtown that we had our house, walking distance from. So our favorite tap room was there, restaurants, places to hang out. And so we kind of like, we kind of found our way there. And the way we live when we're there looks a little weird, even in Oregon. Even in Oregon, people are like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, they take it in stride, but they're like, that's different than how I do it. And there have been glitches. It's not a perfect solution for my brain. Where there's like all the stacks of shelving and open storage in the warehouse that kind of visually short circuits my nervous system and brain and other things that aren't perfect. Yet it's worked as a temporary solution, a creative kind of like stopgap until we can set up the more permanent home base that we really want to have there that lets us live more grounded, like when we rented that home. But even when we were still renting the house we had in Oregon, from phase 2 that I shared a moment ago, I was already craving a place that I could put down real roots, like not rented, but owned. If we can ever own land, I feel like I have a whole nother episode to talk about ownership and things like that versus like recognizing that we're like borrowing the land and less colonizer viewpoint of it, I guess. But anyway, a place where we could like paint walls, plant things in our garden, where I could buy craft supplies or a box of flour or sugar to bake with, because I knew I wouldn't just have to pack up and move at any time. Like I was viscerally full body craving that for probably 3 years before we bought this house we're in now. And then we've got phase 3, which is extended van travel. And this isn't a phase. This is like on and off. We've also spent months at a time actually traveling in the van, like not bouncing between 2 known locations, but actually just being on the road. learning what regulates us versus what dysregulates us, discovering what we need to feel anchored. And we've found with that, and just in general, overall, like the pattern we've naturally gravitated toward is never only rooted or only moving. And honestly, that has been the key for us. So this brings us to present day, which is kind of like the home base plus mobile option. So a year ago, as we talked about in last episode, we bought an intergenerational house with my parents here in Las Vegas. And so we have our own 900 square foot apartment attached to the main public space of the family house where my parents live. And so we have our own bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, our own door to the outside, like complete autonomy. And this is our home base now. It's our roots, our primary place. It's the answer to that yearning that I had to have a place that we could design around our nervous systems, a place we knew we were coming back to over and over again that wouldn't go anywhere, that we had like some control over. But we still have the van parked out front when we want to pop out for a weekend. We still have regular trips to Oregon for a couple weeks where we stay in the van at the warehouse. We still have the option to spend a month traveling in the van like we did over the holidays this past season. And we've still got our eye towards having a second home base in Oregon, like a more rooted one for seasonal migration. Summer's there, winter's here. Maybe it'll be a tiny home, maybe something else. We're focusing first on getting this home base in Vegas fully set up, and then we can kind of follow sparks to let that other one unfold. And we're doing it within the reality of what our budget is, like getting creative. And our budget is lower because we're structuring our lives to be sustainable for our neurodivergent brains and nervous systems. Like obviously, if we had unlimited money, we could buy a nice house for ourselves in each location and we could outfit it to be like perfectly accommodated for our brains. But we're finding our own ways and we're actually kind of discovering it's not even necessary nor maybe even what we'd want. We don't need to be like have a trust fund to do this. And in the end, the important thing is that this isn't between homes. This is having multiple home bases by design. And I know even our specific version required resources many people don't have, like buying a house with family, owning a van, a partner's business that has a warehouse. But it's like the principle that scales. Multi-base living can mean staying with family part of the year, a friend's place you visit regularly, that vacation rental you return to annually, a borrowed RV for 2 weeks, house sitting gigs, geographic arbitrage, like moving somewhere cheaper part of the year. The core isn't about money, it's about designing geographic flexibility in whatever way your resources allow and finding ways to do it that work for your brain and your circumstances. And sometimes there are ways available to us that we just don't see until we know to look. That's the beauty of following sparks, right? Like sometimes it just takes following that spark until you eventually look up and do realize that you've created something that truly suits you, something that you actually couldn't have dreamed up if you had set out to create it to begin with. So if you listen to episode 20, Built to Hold Opposites, you've heard me talk about like this tension that we carry. And if you're not ADHDer, you've lived it. Our ADHD needs novelty, movement, change in order to stay engaged in life. And then our autism needs predictability, sameness, known routines to feel safe and stable. And most of us see the place we live as like a choice between two opposites, either stay put or move, structure or flow. But geographic flexibility, this is one way to honor both, to design for our duality. So the ADHD side gets different environments, new inputs, movement that prevents stagnation. And then the autistic side gets returning to the same places, known beds, familiar sensory environments, predictable rotation patterns. And that's why Kara and Nate's 3 nights per bed doesn't work for us. Our nervous system like to revisit the same beds. And so like the van is like the pinnacle of this. It lets us travel with our bed. Like if you think about it, like we get to go back to the same Oregon spots, have a home base in Vegas we return to, and travel with the same bed, like same bed, different place. Same bed, different place equals novelty with predictability. Both needs met at once. Okay. So what does multi-base living actually look like? Like it can mean a lot of different things here. And also before I jump into that, I also want to name like the, I guess, partner privilege maybe that goes along with this, or just the element of whether you have a partner or not. Because I think that does factor into it for me. I think it makes the van life side of things a lot easier because there are a lot of executive function elements to that, much more than you would think. You would actually think it would be less living in a van, but it's not. There's actually a lot more things to think about than living in just your home. And that works for me because I have a partner and there's two of us. But I recognize if it was just me, that might not be the solution for me because that might just be too much. And then there might be a different solution. So I guess what I'm saying is I recognize that like some of the things I'm offering as the examples of what I've done are from that framing of like doing it with a partner. Okay. But also when you're not with a partner, you have like ultimate flexibility to just flex and choose the living situation that works for your nervous system, your setup, versus when you have one, you're navigating two different nervous systems, two different, like since we often partner with other neurodivergents, two different neurodivergent operating systems and like what each one needs. So challenges either way, but we're just recognizing the reality of all these pieces and elements that are part of this. Okay. Soapbox to the side, jumping back in. Okay. So we're talking about what does multi-base living actually look like? Like it can mean a lot of different things. So here are some ideas and examples. So it can mean seasonal migration where you have summers in one place, winters another, like what we're working towards, where you are multi-location with a predictable rhythm, like two functioning home bases that you rotate between. Or extended annual stays, like that family cabin that you go to every July for 6 weeks, like for I don't know, 4 years or so, maybe even more, with my family, my parents, my sister, her kids, me and my partner, my brother-in-law, like all of us, the 8 of us had this like specific house on Airbnb that we would rent in Sedona every Thanksgiving. And it was like our ritual, and it was the same place we went back to. And there was just a pattern to it. It felt really, really good. And then they sold that place and things shifted. But just like as an example for that, there's also dual residency where you're living somewhere 6 months, somewhere else 6 months. I guess that's maybe sort of connected to the seasonal migration, but maybe not. Regular rotation, month here, month there, predictable pattern. Or the home base plus mobile option, like what we're doing now. You have a rooted place and you have the ability to kind of like pop out when you need to, or when you're feeling that energy. So the key thing is that these aren't visits. These are places you actually live. I think that might be a key for an AuDHD nervous system is visiting is chaos. Visiting is unsettling, but living where there's like some known things that you can control and you can make it work for your nervous system because and you have it established, like that is different. And the van serves us even when we're not traveling. Like it's parked outside our house right now, or it would be, except for my partner just took it to work somewhere, which there you go. I can get into it, go work somewhere like at a park with some pretty tree view or something like that for the day, and then come back to our home base. And sometimes I'll just go sit in there for an afternoon. Like a couple of weeks ago, I did that. I was on my period. I was tired. I had completed all of my client work for the week. I had recorded that week's podcast episode, and I just really wanted to rest, but I just couldn't rest in my home environment. I felt unsettled. It felt like kind of that kinetic energy at play a bit. And so I went into the van with my laptop, my game console, my iPad, and there was something about being in there. It's like more contained, more minimalist energy, not a lot of stimulation, no house projects visible, not a lot of options kind of pulling me in different directions. It feels more enclosed while still being airy and bright. And so I ended up like organizing my Instagram highlights, doing some other light creative tasks, played a game for a little while, and then I was ready to go back inside, and I just like, it shifted the energy. So when you're overwhelmed with all the things to do, sometimes fewer options helps. And the van has become a regulation space, a space where I can do that. It's not just transportation. Okay. And then there's the whole idea of bringing your home with you. So over the holidays, we drove to Nebraska for Thanksgiving to visit my partner's mom, and we usually stay in her guest room. And that can be really hard for autistic nervous systems, like not your bed, not your sensory environment, no escape when you're overstimulated. And this time we brought our own home with us. We parked in her driveway in our van. We had our own space, our own bed, our own like surroundings. We had more agency, more control, a place to retreat and recharge if we needed it. And it was really helpful. And plus we got to easily bring our Doberman, who is like our child. So we had our dog with us, and then his mom could kind of like get to engage and interact with our dog. And this is what having a mobile option can give you, not constant movement. It's more about choice. Okay, so how do you actually design for this? Because maybe you're not getting a camper van, and maybe that's actually not the right move for you. Or maybe you're not like going to have a home in 2 different locations. Or maybe like how do we design for this regardless of what the structure ends up looking like? How do we design for feeling settled while still giving ourselves the stimulation and the changing things up, or the nervous system migration, or the seasonal need to be somewhere cooler when it's hot, or somewhere warmer when it's cold, or has sunlight when it's dark, or, that kind of thing. Okay. So here's what I've learned that I need. So number 1 is portable anchors. So these are like those specific routines that travel with you, like the same morning sequence, the same evening wind down. Maybe it's sensory comfort items. For us, that's our bedding, the lighting inside our van that has like a dimmable switch, familiar sounds, just the coziness of it, like familiar foods, preparation methods maybe, or maybe like whatever your personal settling rituals are that make you feel settled. And so we're not starting from scratch in every new place. We're bringing our anchors with us. And actually, there's a Ukrainian folk tradition to bring soil from your homeland when you travel, like a little pouch of earth, a handful of ground from the place that is like yours. It feels like home. And it's really practical when you think about it, like a physical reminder, something to touch, something that says, I'm still connected to where I'm from, or I'm still home. So for you, that might look like your own small jar from your yard, or maybe a twig foraged from your favorite park or natural area, but like respectfully, or photos of ancestors that you bring with you, or a specific object that travels everywhere, the pillow from your bed, your grandmother's scarf. Like what the specific item is doesn't matter. What matters is you're bringing what grounds you along for the journey. Maybe it's your weighted blanket, like, I don't know. What is it? And then number 2 is predictable rhythms. So like known rotation patterns, like not winging it, established home bases, not constantly new places. It's time to settle before moving again. Like we've definitely noticed, or I've noticed, because I'm like the pattern finder analyzer person. I've definitely noticed that when we are going to new places, there's a lot more chaos, a lot more of us snapping at each other, a lot more like just dysregulation. And when we're going back to the same places we've already been, we're a lot more settled. We feel like stimulated and excited, but like our nervous systems are like calm, and it's just like that predictable rhythm is major for our brains and nervous systems. And we're not embracing chaos. We're creating structure that can move with us. And then number 3 is nervous system assessment. So that kinetic energy check that I told you about at the beginning of this episode, like trusting when something feels off, like noticing, and because we'll notice straight off, and chances are it doesn't get better. Like if something feels off to begin with, in the middle of the night, it also feels off. And so I've learned to kind of like trust that feeling. Also like knowing your capacity, how long can you move versus when do you actually need to feel rooted? Like starting to notice what that is for you, because it's probably different for each of us. And permission to design it differently than anyone else, right? Like if you're like, okay, so this is what nomadic people do, or this is what other people seem to be able to do. They can kind of like go to any Airbnb whenever, but for me, what I need to do is to make sure that for example, if I'm going on a trip with family, that there are separate bedrooms for everybody. Nobody's sleeping in the living room, so that there's that separated space. I need to look and make sure there's like a cozy couch for relaxing. Just what are the things, and just know like that's how you design it. It doesn't matter that someone else doesn't need to consider those things. Like you've gone your life not considering the things you need, so like now's the time. Okay, and then number 4 is returning to known places, which I feel like I kind of maybe tied in with number 2, predictable rhythms. Sorry, ADHD brain here. I jumped forward. But yeah, returning to known places, like I said, huge. And so we're not constantly seeking new locations. We go back to the same campsites in the van if we're familiar, like if we're in like states we've been in before. We take the same routes. The van is literally the same bed traveling with us. And that familiarity is what makes the movement sustainable. Like we're not tourists, we're inhabitants of multiple places. And so this works when you need novelty to stay engaged with life. When one location feels limiting or the energy starts to get stagnant, when seasons genuinely affect your regulation, heat, cold, gray skies, needing brightness, and when you have the capacity to maintain multiple bases, when you can build predictable patterns within the movement, like when all of these one or all of these are, involved in this decision, then this can be really helpful. And it doesn't work though when constant change is too dysregulating, when rootedness serves us better, when you don't have the infrastructure or support, or when it's escape from problems versus designing for needs, or when you're trying to do it like someone else instead of for your brain. So for us, we started to find that we needed more rootedness than we had during those years of constantly bouncing around. And that's why we bought the house. That's where we're putting down deep roots here in Vegas. But we also need the option to move still, to follow seasons, to pop out when needed. So both are true. We're built to hold both. And I mean that literally, like built for this, because this isn't just a clever life hack or modern solution. And so let me show you what I mean. Okay, so for hundreds of thousands of years, long before settled agriculture, long before permanent villages, our ancestors moved seasonally. Not wandering aimlessly, they had known territories they returned to year after year. Summer camps, winter villages, multi-site living where different locations served different purposes. They also weren't tourists passing through. They were inhabitants of multiple places also. And anthropologists call this seasonal rounds, predictable circuits through different territories at different times of year. So the practical reality was like following animal migrations, salmon runs, caribou herds, harvesting plants when they were ripe, berries in summer, nuts in fall, moving to where water and resources were abundant each season, winter camps in protected valleys, summer camps near fishing grounds. And then the embodied knowing part is like our bodies knowing when it's time to move, reading weather patterns, animal behavior, plant cycles, deep familiarity with multiple landscapes, seasonal rhythms in bones and blood, not arbitrary, ancestral. These were not random wanderings. These were known territories. Same summer fishing spot, same winter shelter, same berry patches visited for generations. And probably many of our AuDHD ancestors were specifically suited for this way of living. Like think about what AuDHD nervous systems need, like that ADHD novelty need, environmental change, following dopamine where it leads, and then that autistic side with the deep familiarity, returning to known patterns, sensory attunement to environment. Now imagine these traits in seasonal movement context. The person who notices the air feels different, storm coming, we should move to the protected valley, or the berries aren't ripe yet here, but they will be at the other camp, or The fish are running. I can feel it. Time to go to the riverside. Like the person who thrives on summer camp stimulation and winter camp quietness, knowing multiple landscapes intimately, having reasons to move that feel essential and not arbitrary, because I think arbitrary can be tough for our brains and get us into that scattered place. Returning to the same summer spot year after year, there's that like predictability within movement. And so these aren't deficits. These are designed features for seasonal living. And that autistic sensory sensitivity, noticing temperature changes before others, feeling when a space is wrong, like that kinetic energy, detecting subtle shifts in weather, light, seasons, needing different sensory environments at different times. In modern settled life, this can feel like a burden, too sensitive, can't handle normal conditions. But in seasonal movement, this is essential intelligence. Like the person who feels the cold coming early, who knows when it's time to leave the summer grounds, who reads the landscape signals, like, wow, yeah, right? Like my easily overheated system that needs to escape Vegas summer, or my sensitivity to Oregon's gray winters affecting my mood, like that's not a weakness. That's my body knowing what it needs to thrive, like the same way our ancestors knew when to move between territories. And that ADHD brain that gets stagnant in one place, in settled civilization, like why can't you just be content? But in seasonal living, perfect. You're the one who initiates the move to summer grounds. Like you feel when it's time before anyone else gets restless. And the person who follows sparks, who can't stick to one plan, in modern life, maybe it's like they're flaky, uncommitted, can't finish anything. But in the seasonal context, they're responsive to changing conditions, adaptive, reading what the moment actually needs rather than forcing a predetermined plan. So here's the thing, like for most of our human existence, people didn't have scientific explanations for why they moved seasonally. They just knew. Bodies felt when it was time. The pull to move was not questioned, it was followed. Certain times of year meant certain places. You didn't need a reason beyond this is when we go. Following seasons wasn't chaos, it was attunement to landscape, to body, to rhythms deeper than any one location could provide. And honestly, when I started bopping around between my parents' place and Oregon and living in the van, I did not have a language for any of this. I didn't even know the term AuDHD yet, but my body knew. It knew staying in one place felt like death, like stagnation. It knew I needed the movement and the returning. It knew the campervan needed to be part of the ecosystem. I was following seasonal rounds without having words for it, following patterns my nervous system remembered even when my conscious mind had no framework. My Ukrainian ancestors understood this, deeply tied to the land. And when they traveled far away in another territory, they would sprinkle that soil they carried with them when they stood on that new land and say, I walk on my land. Not abandoning where they came from, not unmoored, bringing it with them. So I like to at home set up an ancestral altar, photos of my great-grandmothers, a candle, a dish for food offerings to the ancestors. And you know what? I could bring a version of that when we travel. A travel altar, one photo, one candle, one sacred object, or literally, like the Ukrainian custom, a small jar of soil from our yard here in Vegas, from the land I'm tending, the native plants I'm growing, something that says, this is still home even when I'm elsewhere. I am still home. Creating ritual around what grounds us when we move, that is ancient too. That is the witch wisdom alongside the practical adaptation. So settled year-round agriculture only emerged around 10,000 years ago. Permanent fixed settlements as the norm, incredibly recent in the scope of human history. And in Eastern Europe, where my ancestors came from, there were these patterns of what's called transhumance well into recent history. Seasonal livestock migration, moving between mountain pastures in warm seasons and lower valleys in the winter, cattle to higher ground when lowlands got hot, return to valleys when mountains got cold, following what bodies, human and animal, needed to thrive. Rituals marked these seasonal transitions. It was not chaos, it was sophisticated ecological intelligence. And so my Oregon Vegas pattern, escaping heat in Vegas summers, escaping gray in Oregon winters, following what my nervous system needs to regulate, that is the same pattern, just modern. So let me ask you, when have you felt most alive, most regulated, most yourself? Maybe you've always wanted to summer somewhere, but dismissed it as impractical. Maybe you feel best when rotating between your place and your family's place. Maybe you get that urge to just drive somewhere when you're overwhelmed. Maybe you dream about having a second home base, even something small. Maybe you notice certain times of year you want to be elsewhere, not just visit. Maybe you feel stagnant staying in one place, but also get dysregulated by constant travel. Your body is showing you what it needs. That thing you thought was too weird or too complicated, that might be the design your nervous system is actually asking for. So here's where to start. Not by selling your house or buying a van. Let's not just jump there. But we start by noticing, by experimenting. Could you spend 2 weeks somewhere else this year, a month? Could you rotate between your place and a friend's or family's place for a season? Could you rent out your home and try another location? Could you keep your home base but add 1 week-long trips somewhere else every quarter? Start small, notice what your body tells you, let the structure emerge from the data your nervous system is giving you, and that it gives you as you try it. You don't have to identify as nomadic. You don't have to do it like the suitcase entrepreneur or Kara and Nate or like me or like anyone else. You do not have to commit to constant movement or give up having a home base. You just have to notice how each of the questions feel in your body and notice if there's a pull towards or a push away when you hear them. What if I had 2 places I genuinely lived? Is that a push? Is that a pull? What if I follow the seasons to regulate my nervous system? Push or pull? What if I had a mobile option for when I need to pop out? Push or pull? What if that vacation spot became an annual extended stay where I actually know the rhythms? What if I stopped trying to have one permanent address and designed something that fits my brain instead? Push or pull? And maybe it's not even about moving between locations. Maybe it's just about giving yourself permission to design life structures that look nothing like the blueprint you were handed. Okay. Last episode, Living with Parents, I talked about how that arrangement gave me the breathing room to rebuild my life, to come back from burnout, to design work that actually fits my brain. This episode, same principle, bigger scale. Your whole life structure can be built for your nervous system, not squeezed into one permanent location, the same weather year-round, staying put because that's what stable adults do, choosing between rooted or mobile. This is ecosystem design at the macro level. You don't need to identify as nomadic or any other label. You don't need to explain why you need multiple locations. You don't need to do it like anyone else. You don't need to commit to constant movement. You don't need to apologize for having an unconventional setup. You just need to notice what your body is asking for and trust your nervous system's read on places. Design the structure that serves you. Give yourself permission to live across locations if that's what fits. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans moved seasonally. They had those summer camps and winter villages. They were inhabitants of multiple places. They followed what their bodies needed. They read the land. They moved with rhythm, not chaos. So remember, staying in one place year-round, that's recent. That's the experiment. Following seasons, that's ancient. That's what bodies remember. This isn't instability. This is attunement. And sometimes the life that works for your brain, the life that lets you show up resource, that lets you build work that matters, that lets you be fully yourself, looks nothing like anyone else's blueprint. And that's exactly right. Okay, before you go, if you want to come back to any of this, because I know our working memory doesn't hold on to everything, there is a detailed guide for this episode at AuDHDsparks.com with all of the key points. If something landed for you, I would love to hear about it. I'm on Instagram at @IamAdriaSophia. And if you are wondering where else you might still be masking, where you're still trying to fit instead of just being, I made something for you. It is called the Unmasking Menu, 7 specific places you can start being more you. You can grab it over at unmaskingmenu.com. It is totally free. And if you want support actually doing this work, you can find out more about working with me at AuDHDer.com. Thanks for being here.